Ah, rats might be what you say when you try to think of a non-Face Hunter deck in current standard format of Hearthstone. Well, here's a deck centered around the new Rat King card and the other assortment of rat-themed cards that were released in United and Stormwind. The deck centers around trying to play a token style of a deck between Rat's Nest and Rats of Extraordinary Size. Or the early game of this deck kind of performs similar to Face Hunter, to be honest, but it's the mid game to late game where it shines a bit more, since it gives you a bit of a more control-y strategy than Face Hunter would normally be. So now let's get into the featured games. Alright, let's get into the first game, which is against Priest. Here we mulligan for tracking. Hoping to see some early game plays besides just being able to track a random deck out of the deck, or discover a random card out of the deck. We get Teacher's Pet, which is alright for a bit later in the game, and then a Demon Companion, which is a good start. Here we find out they're playing Shadow Priest, which is actually a deck that I've been wanting to cover. I just wanted to get some of the funny, gimmicky decks out of the way first. I just passed the turn here. I probably should have used tracking in order to get an extra card for the next turn. Just going to hero power here. This game really becomes a race between who can outdamage who faster. Drawing a lot of our high cost cards, which kind of sucks, but it is what it is. Primordial Protector was an interesting card in the deck just because it allowed you to run either Guardian Animals or Jewel of N'Zoth easy without feeling too bad about running it. But given the state of the current metagame, it might have not been the best decision. Especially if we keep drawing into Guardian Animals. Here we go for the Piper, and then just hero power, and then look for a Nurk card. Grabbing the second Teacher's Pet. To try to minimize the amount of base damage that will be happening to us. It's interesting the amount of cards that Shadow Priest can use, even if they have the requirement of not using any holy spells. They have a good amount of self-sustain through the lifesteal in cards. Here is where I wish that the Piper had Rush on it, so that we could buff up our minions turn 1. That's honestly the main issue with that card in particular, is the lack of rush most of the time makes it into a pseudo taunt, which means people will just get rid of it as quickly as possible. It also doesn't help that certain cards in the deck that you would expect to be beasts aren't technically beasts, like Rodent's Nest. It just spawns a bunch of beasts. as of right now in the game, we're not in the worst position in the world. But the opponent is definitely thinking how to get through our game plan. I'm assuming they thought I was a face hunter, since 90% of hunters are all face. They get rid of our... Now that his weapon is gone, we can play one of the rats of extraordinary size in order to get a wide board out and have some in our hand that are 5/5 one cost, which can be pretty devastating if the opponent is not prepared to deal with them. Here I'm just hoping that they don't generate something off of palm reading that will wipe out the board. But it doesn't look like they did. Here is where I would wish I had a Hyper in order to buff up all the 1/1s, but sadly I do not. And here we also draw into our second guardian animal, which sucks. Here I want to minimize the amount of board presence they have without losing too much advantage. So we clear all but one minion and then place our 2/5/5 rats. And then they get Soul Mirror, which wipes our board and leaves their 4/3, which really sucks, and there's not much we can do about it. But we can still try to survive through the game, hopefully. This really demonstrates one of Hunter's main weaknesses, and why Face Hunter is usually the only deck that ever does anything for Hunter, which is no sustainability from life. This game is one of the reasons why I started including Flight Master instead of the Apex Predator, because it feels much nicer to heal for 10 than it does to get 4/4/4 on the board whenever you get the Prime out. It also screws over your guardian animals, where you don't want to use it while you have the Prime in your deck, since you basically lose out on getting 3 of the 4/4s. Honestly, this game I should have probably treated more like a race for face, instead of trying to control the board. And now we get extra damage from all sources, which is not good. So they have plenty of cards to deal direct damage, and we just lose the game from this point, which sucks because honestly the game didn't feel too awful, but it definitely does demonstrate why Hunter doesn't try to go for the long game. But this game definitely did change how I built the deck a little bit. Alright, now time for game 2 against a warrior. Here we're going for early game hand again. Getting rid of the Rats of Extraordinary Size, getting an even worse card for opening hand. Tracking in Mankirk is fine though. Then we just pass the turn again. I'm being kind of greedy with the trackings in these games because I wanted to use Pack Runner to generate a bunch of 1/1s. You're going to use the hero power. It's against Quest Warrior, which is cool to see. Not something I was too worried about seeing with this deck. Because while they do run a good chunk of minions, they're usually smaller minions. So this is probably the better warrior matchup that this deck could have had. Mankirk's always a nice card to run in a hunter deck just because you can guarantee drawing into the wife with the Odo Bane legendary. Here we play the Piper. We hope to get the a buff on our Teacher's Pet next turn. And then the opponent's trying to figure out what deck we're playing, because face hunters don't usually run Piper. They're just trying to complete their quest as quickly as possible. The South Seas Captain might become an issue just because it buffs up all the other minions. But we can play Teacher's Pet into Devouring Swarm, which will allow us to buff up our Teacher's Pet twice. And maybe get the Piper back in hand, which we do. So we have a nice wall on the board to go against the pirates that he'll play this turn. It's nice that charge isn't a keyword really in standard anymore. But then he has another captain, which again sucks, but it is what it is. We're still in a pretty good position overall for the game. Him getting rid of that is not really, honestly, that much of a problem. And then here we get the Pack Rider, which allows us to get a Demonic Companion easily and a couple Hyenas, which allows us to clear out the board for the most part. Honestly, pretty happy with how this game went. It demonstrates the ability to start with like a aggro hunter based strategy into a token based strategy. It also continues my love-hate relationship with the Stormwind Pipers. Here we clear his board. And here I was hoping to be able to trigger the secret on the next turn if he didn't clear the board out. But to be honest, the best option would have probably been Explosive Trap if we had been offered it up. Sadly, we weren't. We played their quest reward, which can be frightening, but with Guardian Animals on turn 8, we should be in a good position. Here we get exactly what we needed to get off of Guardian Animal, so we can just easily kill the quest reward 7/7. Then have one more poisonous for their next turn. Here we're going for the Explosive Trap because it's always going to be the best option unless there's a huge minion. Then Ice Trap or Freezing Trap would be the best one to go with. I love seeing some of the less used quests in action. It's kind of sad that the Warrior quest is just barely not good enough to be meta relevant. Either because of the pool of pirates or the pool of weapons. It just doesn't have a good enough payoff compared to some of the other quests. Here we're trying to maximize the amount of 5/5s that we get in our hand, so we can just play them all in the next turn. Hopefully putting enough pressure and not running into a brawl. Kind of weird to me that brawl isn't more common than it already is right now. Maybe it's just because one of the other big meta relevant decks it would do nothing against is Quest Mage. But the rest it honestly wouldn't be too bad to run. Because most decks right now are focusing on wide boards and not big minions, since the metagame is so quick. Them getting the cleave weapon kind of sucks, but at the same time we get our Rat King back. Still haven't triggered the first secret. Probably should have never chosen it, but oh well. And now we just flood the board with a bunch of 5/5s. And hero power and attack for face. Besides having a brawl, there's not much they can do. The opponent's probably wondering how they can get out of this. If they use a spell to trigger their weapon, they might be able to clear out most of the board. But given the fact that it's Quest Warrior, I don't know how many quest or non-quest spells that they run. They're just hoping to armor up enough so they don't lose. We get our final secret triggered, and we just win the game. Alright, let's now get into the discussion about how well the deck did. Alright, now since we went through the games, let's go over how the deck performed overall. I played 24 games, I think, of the deck, and it performed actually better than I had expected. It's always fun finding cool and interesting hunter decks that most people overlook just because Ego Face is so popular with the hunter players in the game. The card that felt the most awkward in it is probably Stormwind Piper, which you could replace with a bunch of different 3-cost units such as Archdruid, Devouring Ectoplasm, Pack Kodo, which honestly I wouldn't really suggest in a deck that's running Guardian Animals. Robes of Protection would actually be really strong if I had ran into a bunch of Quest Mages, which weirdly enough I did not when I was playing this deck. Restaurant Viper would also have been a good choice, but also dilutes your pool with Guardian Animals, and there's not many good weapon decks right now. Wild Claw was something I briefly considered, but I didn't run because I figured it would just be kind of awkward since most of your beasts in the deck aren't actually in your deck in particular. They're being generated off of spells or minions. And then the Apex Predator, I tried to use it early on, but it really always felt awkward to get off of Guardian Animals. Definitely do not recommend putting it back in. Jewels, unless you're playing Jewels of N'Zoth instead of Guardian Animals. This would allow you to get more Rat Kings, but then you could also, in theory, clog your board with just Rat Kings being dormanted, which might not be the best idea in the world, because it could lead to some awkward situations. And then Quick Shot, I had considered it over the 2 costs that upgrades and generates you a token, but I liked having an extra minion that had varying sizes in the games. But overall, I was pretty happy with how the deck performed. Like I said before, it's really nice to see that the deck can perform at a level where it's competent enough where you can maybe climb ladder a little bit without having to play face hunter when it comes to hunter. Another thing that you might need to realize, and I didn't realize it until partway through, I think, end games, was Rat's Nest or Rodent Nest is not actually a beast itself. So you might, with Piper, accidentally forget that since it's not a beast, you try to buff up the Rodent Nest and it just doesn't, and you wonder why, which sucks. But don't be me. Pay attention to the tags on the cards. Imported Tarantula was honestly a really nice card against like any decks with big minions. It allowed you to get rid of those big minions pretty quick, and it was a really nice card to get off of Guardian Animals. Teacher's Pet was alright. It lets you survive a little bit. Hunter has an issue with surviving for long periods of time, which is why I put in Flight Master instead of Archdruid. But you could swap those two around if you really wanted to, or you could put Archdruid instead of a Piper. So until next time, enjoy yourself.